Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH. Today we're looking at Squirrel Tribal, specifically headed by the odd Acorn gang. Now, there are multiple different Squirrel Tribal commanders that you could run, multiple of which will appear in this deck, but I felt like the odd Acorn gang was probably the best one to be our commander. So with that said, what does it do? It's a 5 mana black and green 5/5. It has Menace, Trample, and Reach. Squirrels you control have tap, target squirrel gets +2/+2 and gains trample until end of turn, activate as a sorcery. And whenever one or more squirrels you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. So this ability right here, the Toski ability, the Bident of Thassa ability, however you want to call it, is the reason that I felt that this one would probably be the best commander. Whereas the other commanders, they do have good abilities. I felt like this was probably the best one. So with that said, we're obviously a squirrel deck. We're obviously built around putting out a bunch of tiny 1/1 squirrel tokens and flooding the board full of squirrels. So we're going to improve that with our beatdown cards. So we've got Beastmaster Ascension. Whenever a creature you control attacks, you may put a quest counter on Beastmaster Ascension, and as long as it has 7 or more quest counters on it, creatures you control get +5/+5. So presumably, you want to have 7 creatures, you attack with all of them, this instantly gets filled up, and then all of your guys get +5. There's Camellia the Seed Miser, one of our other potential squirrel commanders, a 3 mana 3/3 with Menace. Other squirrels you control have Menace. Whenever you sacrifice one or more foods, create a 1/1 squirrel, and 2 Forage. Forage is exile 3 cards from your graveyard or a sack of food. Put a +1 counter on each other squirrel you control. So if we wanted to maybe be a more beatdown route, potentially, we could have played Camellia. I feel like Odd Acorn's abilities are just a lot better. Chitter Splitter, at the beginning of your upkeep, you may sack a token. If you do, put an Acorn counter on this. Squirrels you control get +1/+1 for each Acorn counter on it, and we can pay a green and tap, create a 1/1 squirrel token. Coat of Arms, all creatures get +1 for each other creature in play that shares a type with it. This does apply to our opponents, but it's obviously going to apply much more to our own creatures. Squirry of Squirrels, Myriad. So whenever this deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. And Myriad means when it attacks, we get a token copy that's also attacking each opponent. And since it has 2 versions of Myriad, basically when this attacks, we are assuming we're in a 4-player pod. We're going to make 6 squirrel tokens that then die at the end of combat. We also have our Squirrel Lords, Squirrel Mob, and Squirrel Sovereign. And then we have Valley Rot Caller, a 2 mana 1/3 with Menace that says whenever it attacks, each opponent loses X and you gain X life, where X is the number of other squirrels, bats, lizards, and rats you control. Then in our card draw, we've got Bolas' Citadel, Necro, Sylvan Library One Ring, and Toski, which is not only good in this deck, but it's also a squirrel. And we have Ravenous Squirrel. Whenever you sack an artifact or creature, put a +1 counter on it. 1 black, green, sack an artifact or creature, you gain 1 life and draw a card. And Pact of the Serpent, choose a creature type, target player draws X and loses X, where X is the number of creatures they control of the chosen type. So basically the black version of Distant Melody. And then we have our combo cards. So there's a lot here. First of all, we've got the Earthcraft Squirrel Nest combo. So if we enchant a basic land with Squirrel Nest, we can tap the land to make a 1/1 squirrel. We can then use Earthcraft to tap the squirrel token that we just made to untap the basic land that Squirrel Nest is enchanting. And we use this to create infinite squirrel tokens. We also have Chatterfang, Forest Walk. If 1 or more tokens would be created under your control, those tokens plus that many 1/1 green squirrel creature tokens are created instead. And black, sack X squirrels, target creature gets -X. We've got Scurry Oak. Whenever 1 or more +1 counters are put on it, you may create a 1/1 squirrel. And Ivy Lane Denizen. Whenever another green creature enters, put a +1 counter on target creature. So with these 2 in play, we either need to have Ivy Lane Denizen in play and then cast Scurry Oak, or we need to have both of these in play and then cast any other creature or trigger Scurry Oak once. What will happen is a +1 counter gets put on Scurry Oak, or a creature enters, triggering Ivy Lane Denizen. The +1 counter makes a squirrel. The squirrel entering triggers Ivy Lane, which puts a +1 counter on the Scurry Oak, which creates a 1/1, which triggers Ivy Lane Denizen, which puts the counter on the Scurry Oak, etc. Scurry Oak becomes infinitely huge, and we get infinite 1/1s. And then we have Pitiless Plunderer. Whenever another creature you control dies, create a treasure. And Hazel's Brewmaster. Whenever Hazel's Brewmaster enters or attacks, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard and create a food. And foods you control have all activated abilities of all creature cards exiled with Hazel's Brewmaster. Now, Devoted Druid is also going to be part of these combos, or at least some of them. So to explain some of the combos that I haven't covered already, if we have Hazel's Brewmaster plus Devoted Druid, now Devoted Druid needs to be in exile, and it needs to be exiled by Brewmaster, so it has to be in our graveyard, but that's easy enough because we can just activate Devoted Druid twice to put it in the graveyard. So, exile the Devoted Druid with Hazel's Brewmaster, and we need to have 1 food token. which we will get by triggering the first ability on Hazel's Brewmaster. So we activate the food using Devoted Druid's first ability by tapping it, because remember, the foods have all the activated abilities of all the creatures exiled with Hazel's Brewmaster. So we tap the food for green, then we activate the -1 counterpart of Devoted Druid using the food token. Well, the food token is a food token, it's not a creature, so the -1 counter on it doesn't mean anything. Untap the food token, repeat, we have infinite green mana. Another combo with Scurry Oak, so this is apart from Ivy Lane Denizen, is specifically with Coat of Arms. So the prerequisites for this are, we have Scurry Oak and Coat of Arms on the battlefield. You have to have a way to put a +1 counter on the Scurry Oak, and the number of squirrels we control has to be greater than Scurry Oak's power. So you put a +1 counter on the Scurry Oak. The Scurry Oak triggers, because remember, it has Evolve. So basically the squirrel tokens that we're creating have to enter because of Coat of Arms with the power that's bigger than what Scurry Oak has. So the Scurry Oak triggers, creating a 1/1 squirrel that gets +1/+1 for each other squirrel on the battlefield. The squirrel enters, triggering Scurry Oak's Evolve ability. You put a +1 counter on it, repeat, you go infinite. Now the results of this are that you get infinite creature tokens, infinite enter the battlefield, and infinitely large creatures because all of your squirrels are enormous, obviously. However, this would normally be a mandatory ability, but because the bottom part of Scurry Oak is a May ability, you can stop this. So all you do is you just do that combo, and then of course you can win, either overrunning your opponent next turn or give all of your stuff haste and overrun them immediately. And then finally, the last combo is Chatterfang plus Pitiless Plunderer. So you have to have both of these. You have to control at least 2 additional squirrels, and you have to have a black mana available. So you activate the Chatterfang, you pay black, and you sacrifice 2 squirrels. The squirrels die, and they trigger Pitiless Plunderer, so you create 2 treasure tokens, and because Chatterfang is in play, you also create 2 squirrels. So you can activate a treasure to produce black, you then repeat the steps. So you're creating 2 squirrels, sacking, and 2 treasures. You're sacking one of the treasures to pay for the black of the Chatterfang, and this causes you to have 1 infinite +X/-X abilities, so you can kill all of your opponent's stuff, but you also make infinite treasures and therefore infinite mana. Now moving on from there, we've got our pretty regular lands here. Obviously Gaia's Cradle, because we're making a bunch of creatures. There's also Mudflat Village and Oak Hollow Village. So Mudflat is tap for colorless or tap for black, spend only to cast a creature, and we can pay 1 and a black, sacrifice it, return target bat, lizard, rat, or squirrel from the graveyard to your hand. So just a little bit of extra utility in case one of our important cards has been killed and we want to get it back. And for Oak Hollow Village, it's green tap, put a +1 counter on each frog, rabbit, raccoon, or squirrel you control that entered the battlefield this turn. Otherwise, pretty regular mana base. A little bit of protection, obviously a bunch of ramp cards. Unfortunately, most of these are not squirrels. However, there is one that is a squirrel, Thorn Vault Forager. 2 mana 2/2, tap for green, or tap Forage. Forage, exile 3 cards from your graveyard or sack of food. Add 2 mana in any combination of colors, and you can pay 4, tap, search your library for a squirrel, reveal it, put it in your hand. Pretty useful when you want to tutor up squirrel-based combo pieces like Scurry Oak or Hazel's Brewmaster or Chatterfang. Some removal, nothing really much to say here. Some stacks pieces, so specifically most of our mana ramp is in the form of creatures. So Collector Oof and Null Rod don't affect us too much, whereas they stacks out the opponents. Also Oppo Agent. We have our sweeper in Swarmyard Massacre, 5 mana sorcery, create 2 squirrels. Then each creature that isn't an insect, rat, spider, or squirrel gets -1/-1 until end of turn for each creature you control that's an insect, rat, spider, or squirrel. So it's an asymmetrical -2 on all of your opponent's stuff, and more than that if we control more squirrels than the 2 tokens that this creates. Then we've got all of our tutors. Obviously, creature tutors are going to be more valuable than normal because many of our combos involve creatures. So Court of Calling, Eldritch Evolution. If we make infinite mana, we've got Finale of Devastation to overrun the opponent. And then finally, 2 additional squirrels that didn't really fall into any specific category. So Hazel of the Root Bloom, which is again one of these squirrels that could have been our commander. 4 mana 3/5, 2 life and tap. Tap X untap tokens you control. Add X mana in any combination of colors. At the beginning of your end step, create a token that's a copy of target token you control. If the token is a squirrel, instead create 2 tokens that are copies of it. And Osteomancer Adept, 2 mana 2/2 Death Touch. Tap until end of turn. You may cast creature spells from your graveyard by foraging in addition to paying their other costs. If you cast a spell this way, the creature enters with a finality counter on it. So if the creature would die, instead you exile it. So with all that said, that's going to be the Squirrel Tribal deck, helmed by the Odd Acorn gang for EDH.